Nazi army. Designed by Daimler-Benz, the heavily fortified 23-ton tanks could reach speeds of up to 21 miles per hour. Another variation was the Sturmgeschütz III, built on the chassis of the Panzer. This artillery weapon, known as the Stuga, sat low to the ground and was equipped with a powerful 75mm gun. It was a true tank killer. The German tanks outgunned and outmaneuvered their Soviet counterparts. Stalin was relying on the T-26, a slow-moving, lightly armed vehicle. In 1941, the Nazis destroyed more than 20,000 Soviet tanks.
We tend in the West to think of our own technological supremacy, but we often overlook the fact that German panzer design, if you will, the advances that they tried to push, and they did succeed in achieving remarkable advances in their armored fleet, these were designed to combat Soviet numerical advantage, but also Soviet technological advantage.
The Sixth Army would be more vulnerable without the Panzer Army's support, but at that time, it hardly seemed to matter. In July of 1942, Soviet resistance was crumbling, and Hitler's troops were driving towards Stalingrad. The rest of the world was falling as well. Continental Europe was under Nazi control. In Africa, legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had driven British forces back into Egypt and was poised to take Cairo. And Nazi subs were prowling the U.S. coastline, menacing the Allies' newest partner.
Operation Blau was proceeding so well that Hitler now wanted a new prize, the city of Stalingrad. While not as strategically important as the oil fields of the Caucasus, taking Stalin's namesake city would be a body blow to the Soviet army. Like the misconception of Stalin's retreat, it was once again believed that the road to the city was a simple one.
It turned out to be anything but. As the Nazis rumbled towards Stalingrad, the Soviets were regrouping as best they could. Stalin began deploying newly formed armies into the Don Bend, a section of the Don River that formed a sideways U. It was an ideal spot to make a stand. This desperate gambit has been known about for years, but only recently have we realized how effective it was, and how many German soldiers it killed.
Stalin ordered those forces to conduct multiple counterstrokes and strategic counteroffensives.
The fighting was fierce. This was the first major Red Army counteroffensive since the start of Operation Blue. The two sides engaged in Voronezh, a city near the Don. The Soviets had a new weapon.
Stalin committed a brand new tank army, the first the Red Army had ever employed, the 5th Tank Army, into action northwest of Voronezh.
This was a deadly unit, boasting Stalin's latest tank, the T-34. The Soviets finally had an answer to the German Panzer. Production on the T-34 had begun in 1940, but only in 1942 had it begun to dominate the battlefield, just in time to throw fear into the hearts of complacent German soldiers who had gotten used to success.
The T-34 was the most numerous Soviet tank of World War II. Of all types, they made about 83,000. This was produced in large numbers. It was easy to produce and quick to produce, generally considered the best general-purpose tank of the Second World War. It had sloped armor, it had wide tracks. All of these things made it extremely survivable and fast, maneuverable in virtually any type of terrain. The 12-cylinder diesel engine was quite powerful for the time, and it gave it a cruising speed of well over 30 miles per hour. It was equipped with a 76mm gun and two 7.62mm machine guns.
There was only one thing everybody was afraid of, that was the Russian tank T-34. Even the regular gun did not penetrate the Russian front of the tank, but they had to use the 7.5 cannon which was originally against the airplanes.
To destroy a T-34 with, say, a 37 millimeter anti-tank gun, it would literally bounce off the front and even the side slope of the tank. So as far as a tank went, it was reliable, it had sufficient firepower, and it offered great protection for its crew.
Und dieser T-34, der konnte mit uns machen, was wollte.
With the T-34, they could do what they wanted. We had nothing to counter it. It was really bad. The Germans' best hope for defeating a T-34 was with a combination of air power and close-quarter combat. Ground troops needed to be within 250 yards to have any chance of stopping it.
They would have to get very close, and they would aim for vision slits, or they would aim for the engine compartment and try to reduce the tank that way. Once it would be immobile, dismounted soldiers could approach from the rear and climb on top of the tank, ideally tossing a grenade into the crew compartment, or slinging a grenade even underneath the main gun system, immobilizing it that way. The typical tank engagement in the Second World War, even on the Eastern Front, took place at less than 300 yards. So we're already describing close engagement ranges. When we're looking at soldiers destroying a T-34 up close, and we're talking literally getting alongside it.
On the road to Stalingrad, Vig and Worcester came face to face with numerous T-34s. Sometimes it was only luck that allowed him and his men to survive.
Ich schickte einen Soldaten vor.
I sent out a soldier to look round the corner to watch when the Russians were coming, and soon one was approaching, only a single one. I think he was lost and didn't know where to go. The soldier informed us, and we aimed at the corner. When it appeared, we fired, and it was torn into 1,000 pieces. Worcester and his men won that battle, but going after lost tanks was not a repeatable strategy. What had once looked like a cakewalk into Stalingrad had become a titanic struggle. The Sixth Army, attempting to clear the Don Bend alone, was surprised by the ferocity of the Soviet defense. Without the 4th Panzer to assist them, the Nazis were taking a beating from the Red Army and its T-34s.
When Paulus's Sixth Army attempted to move eastward, this operation, in which the Soviets committed not only their 62nd Army, but 2 brand new tank armies, inflicted heavy losses, perhaps as many as 10,000 men on Sixth Army, and prevented Sixth Army from fulfilling its mission for upwards of 3 weeks.
These losses were far more severe than previously believed. The Soviets' counteroffensive was exacting a heavy toll.
There was one very bad experience, a young lieutenant who knew everything better and could not be convinced that you have to be very careful even if you don't have contact with the Russians. He took his unit, about 50 people, to the right and to the left of him, 25, and advanced somehow to the Russian line. We didn't know exactly where they were. And the Russians waited until the Germans approached from 50 feet and killed all of them. So out of 50 people, 2 people survived.
The army that Hitler had famously boasted could storm the heavens was being driven into the ground of southern Russia. The Sixth Army was severely depleted by the time it finally arrived on the banks of the Don.
That meant that when Paulus began his drive on Stalingrad, he did so with forces vastly reduced in strength, and that ultimately would tell on the effectiveness of that drive.
But here, poised on the bluffs overlooking the Don River, it seemed that the German war machine was regaining momentum, finally back on a roll. Paulus's next objective was to capture the land bridge that led into Stalingrad. This time he would get help. Hitler, infuriated by the Sixth Army's slow progress in the Don Bend, had recalled the 4th Panzer Army from the Caucasus. Paulus planned a 2-pronged pincer attack, sending the Sixth Army at the city from the north, while the 4th Panzer attacked from the south. They would close in on Stalingrad along the banks of the Volga. On August 22nd, the first German units crossed the Don, establishing a bridgehead on the east bank. At dawn on the 23rd, the armored vehicles followed. With complete air superiority overhead, Paulus's army broke the early morning silence with a roar of tank engines. The final drive on Stalingrad had begun.
We heard the rumble on the steppe. A lot of the enemy's tanks moved forward. Germans attacked with a tank corps, which destroyed the defense of our 2 small divisions. The corps, not facing any resistance, moved in parade form marching on Stalingrad. Our right-flank battalions of cadets got caught under the thrust of the corps. A small number of tanks separated from the parade march and buried the cadets alive in them. That happened approximately 1 kilometer from us. All the cadets were weeping from futility. Our friends were dying and we could not help them.
By late afternoon, the 6th Army gazed down upon the Volga from Stalingrad's northern suburbs. Paulus unleashed the German Air Force.
At 4 p.m., there appeared an armada of aircraft which moved in several tiers towards Stalingrad. The bombing of the town had begun. The black puffs of burning fuel were coming up several kilometers into the sky. At night, there was a solid glow in Stalingrad.
The bombing continued for days. The civilian death toll exceeded 200,000. More civilians died in the Battle of Stalingrad than in the nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. The city was reduced to rubble. Hitler awaited his prize. In Moscow, Stalin was enraged by the failure of his forces and the seemingly unavoidable fall of his namesake city. True to form, he directed his ire at his commanders, both military and political. Nikita Khrushchev believed he was about to be purged.
Stalin looked at him, go back to front. And my father told that I have no doubt that he will arrest me in the car. Because it was the Stalin tradition to arrest people when he left his place. So he told, I thought I did what I could do. I traveled to the military airfield and nobody arrested me. And then I entered my plane and I flew to front. And I saved only when I landed in Stalingrad. So at that time it was much safer in Stalingrad than in Moscow.
For Khrushchev, fear of Stalin trumped the fear of Nazi bombs. The bombs kept coming, and German ground troops drew ever closer to the smoking ruins of the city. It was almost time for the bloody urban fighting that would be so well documented after the war. Less well documented were a series of hard-fought battles north of the city.